which is true. At the same time, you and I both know that privately, he wrote immediately to David saying, oh shit, you know, I need to come home and do a lecture tour to present alternatives, what did he say, less futile and suicidal than those being presently put forth. And so, as you just said, Baldwin's relationship to quote unquote Black power is complex. And I would love you to, because you know, the thing I didn't realize about Begin Again until I read it as a book between the covers was that it's really a book about No Name in the Street that then radiates out in all kinds of directions from No Name in the Street.
That's it.
And to see it like that now illuminates so much. But of course, one of the things that has to be dealt with and illuminated is, yes, this kind of complex relationship between Baldwin and the mostly the activists of the Black Power generation. So what can you say about that?
You know, first of all, it's just so like you to get it, right? So, you know, the anchor, you know, No Name is the anchor of the book, you know. So when I wrote the first 4 chapters of the book, I was trying to imitate it, you know, I was trying to imitate at the level of form, trying to figure out how to do this. And I remember giving the first 4 chapters to Michael Thelwell, the professor of African American Studies Emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst. And Thelwell, I drove up to Amherst and I was doing some interviews with him, and I drove up and he said, and I had sent him the 4 chapters before I got there. And I walked in and he said, Glaude, I thought you were a smart man. This shit doesn't make any damn sense, right? And you know, and he said it in deep Jamaican patois.
He'll tell it like it is, yeah.
Yeah, right. And part of what happened is that he assumed, and still does, that No Name in the Street is a failure as a book.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of what I wanted to do with Begin Again was to assert the centrality of this book to Baldwin's corpus. That is one of his most important, if not most important, pieces of nonfiction at the level of form and at the level of argument. So, but the reason why folks don't really deal with it, to get at your question, Ed, is because, you know, to my mind, Black power constitutes the repressed of contemporary American politics.
Okay.
Folks don't want to deal with Black power at all. And if you're going to read No Name, you're going to have to confront it.
Yeah.
So Baldwin said in '63 in that room with those Howard students who were members of NAG. And remember, NAG is at the heart of the transformation of SNCC into a Black power organization. I will never betray you.
Yeah.
And Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, in his autobiography, co-authored by Michael Thelwell, says he never did.
Right.
Even though in the letters, in your beautiful book, which we pray will make its way to the world,
yes,
said this mystical Black bullshit is going to spring the trap.
Right.
We're trapped. But what Baldwin was trying to do, I think, is to not allow the nation to refuse or to abdicate its responsibility for the transformation.
Yeah.
These are your babies.
Yeah.
What you're hearing from their mouths is a direct result of what you've done.
Yeah.
So he's engaged in giving an account, just like he did for Malcolm, just like he did for the nation.
And Martin.
How can you expect this not to exist, given what you've done? And so by giving or offering this not only insightful, but generous read.
Very generous. Yes.
Of the politics of the moment, then he gets labeled as, you know, beholden to the propaganda of Black power. His aesthetic has been subsumed by his rage, and that, you know, the stuff James Campbell in that horrible book, what he said, you know,
right,
that kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure, and so important. I wonder, do you have any sense of, because, you know, you know, Black Power takes over from the civil rights movement. But neither the civil rights movement, the organizations involved with that, SCLC, SNCC, CORE, NAACP, you know, those organizations didn't get along either.
Right.
And then the various elements of the Black Power movement, they didn't exactly get along very well either, even within themselves, to say nothing in between themselves. And so in both cases where Baldwin is, you know, in a way setting himself up to translate to the nation, to the mainstream, I can get the story past the editor's desk, is what he said again and again, right? You know, I can, so trying to give substantive and generous readings, he's kind of synthesizing, he's kind of translating, he's almost mediating. And so I'm wondering what's your sense of Baldwin's role as mediator? You know, what are the different positions in the Black Power era that he's kind of moving between? Do you have any?
I mean, the archive doesn't really lend itself to that. You know, it's just like, we know that in the context of the civil rights movement, Baldwin gravitated to SNCC and CORE.
Yeah.
We're clear about that. He supported SCLC, but, you know, Lemming writes in his biography that he actually had memberships in CORE and SNCC. We know that there are checks, and, you know, we can see how he's organizing and raising money for those organizations. We know that in '63, he's in Selma with SNCC in that moment, right? So we're clear about that. And let me just say this before I go on about Black Power. We often read Black Power and the civil rights movement as if they're wholly separate moments. Right. There's some similar the same people in one are in the other.
Yes.
Especially for Jimmy, right? Yeah. So he knew Stokely Carmichael, right, back in the day when he was one of the most skilled organizers for SNCC in the South, in the nonviolent civil rights movement. And he knew Stokely Carmichael when, you know, in June of '66, when he says Black Power, and he understood why he wrote that essay defending him, right? So we often read the Black freedom struggle as if they're two of the mid 20th century, as if they're wholly separate, and we read it that way for a reason. And Jimmy understood that. But, you know, within the context of Black Power, I think there's, in No Name in the Street, I think there's a reason why there isn't any mention, say, of us, Karenga's Us movement, right, in the book. I think there's a reason why he's gravitating to the Black Panther Party, right? Even though Eldridge Cleaver broke his heart, right? I mean, we can't downplay what that critique did to him and how it was devastating in so many ways, right? But I think there's, go ahead, Doc.
Baldwin was, by that time, no stranger to being insulted in those terms. He'd been having that happen since he was a little kid, basically, you know, so there was that. And of course, and Eldridge Cleaver insults him and calls him out of his name and all that stuff, but that doesn't stop him from coming to try to borrow $10,000, you know, 5 years later.
And you see in the Black Panther Party paper, the Panther paper, that every time they have a list of the donors for while he's in exile, Jimmy's name is right there. Boom, boom, boom. Just gives you a sense of his, you know. But you know, I love this story. I think it's in Lemming's biography. Weathersby might mention it. You know, it's a Black Panther event, and this guy has an epileptic fit and starts shooting, and everybody breaks, and they're on the stage with Betty Shabazz and the babies, and everybody just leaves them with the babies, and Jimmy just runs and covers them. Just to give you a sense of the depth and of courage of this brother, you know. But I think he's more attracted to the Panthers because in No Name he's trying to translate the structurally. I like to read. Let me say I read Fire Next Time as the prophecy and No Name as the reckoning. Yeah. And the parallel between the two books is that the nation is in fire. The Panthers are in No Name. Oh, I see. Yes. And just as he's trying to render intelligible the Nation of Islam in the Fire Next Time, he's doing the same thing with the Black Panther Party in No Name in the Street.
Very, very similar thing. Yeah. And that's precisely what I was looking for there, what I wanted to ask you about. And, you know, where Baldwin says to David in that letter, like, you know, we should be storming the barricades. We should be demonstrating in the streets. We shouldn't be caught up in this mystical black bullshit or whatever about, you know,
Right.
the true tribes of Africa or whatever. I think the mystical black bullshit is Baldwin's quick shorthand for the Karenga stuff.
Exactly.
For black
And the
artists,
negritude,
basically.
and the negritude stuff that he encountered in Princes and Powers that he
Kind of
rejected
like
too.
the extension of that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of what he was. In a way, it's his way of dismissing the black arts movement in a similar way that he did the beat movement too. You know?
Yeah.
He kind of brushes it aside in a similar way, and, you know, makes room for artists one by one as they distinguish themselves in ways you can recognize. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of disaggregating a little bit and looking at because Baldwin really went and met these people and went to locations in New York, in Oakland, in LA, showed up at the rallies, covered the babies when the gunfire went off. And he was really there, you know. And, you know, it's interesting about No Name in the Street. And I think back to the thing about Haven and when things become only personal. And by No Name in the Street, which is a, you know, absolutely explicitly political book in all kinds of ways. But at the same time, it's also a very personal book.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I see him doing in No Name in the Street is translating the political programs of the activists one by one and in groups for sure, but also just saying, I was there with them. He's like my little brother. You know, this was personal. And he made the revolution in its various textures a part of his personal life. You know, he says, we went to meet Huey Newton. All he wanted to do was talk up my sister. You know,
yeah.
He does it again and again. And I think it has something to do with the idea that, you know, human reality is always personal and always political. And his struggle as a writer to kind of get those two valences of who we always are to kind of be there together. I think of him listening to Aretha Franklin in the 60s and saying, well, she's doing it. You know, personal and political and feminist, like right in every line. How can I do it?
Well, you know, I think that personal part of No Name is so important, Doc. One of the things I argue about the book at the level of form is that he's trying to mirror or figure out at least how to write a history saturated in trauma.
Yes.
How do you recall? How do you remember wound? Right? And it's fractured. So the book is, as I say over and over again and begin again, it's constantly turning back on itself. So he tells us in the very, very beginning, the first sentence of the second paragraph in No Name in the Street, he says, much has been blotted out, coming back only lately in bewildering and untrustworthy flashes. So he's already telling you the history I'm about to recount. Be skeptical. And then you get all of these conditionals. It may have, it may, dot. And then memory. And then you get that moment where, you know, in it, you know, when Martin has died, in that moment in Atlanta, something broke in me.